In the shadows of a dimly lit casino hallway, the city's most merciless crime lord, Adams Toros, has a cleaning woman pinned against the cold stone wall. His massive frame towers over her, his hand cracking the plaster beside her head as he leans in, his scent of expensive tobacco and cedarwood swallowing her whole. Desperate and trembling with a decade of repressed longing, he demands to know why she is pretending to be a stranger. While Stephanie keeps her eyes wide with feigned terror, her heart thunders against her ribs. She is staring into the eyes of the boy she once saved from the ashes, now a man who has become the very monster she's been running from. 10 years ago, Adams Toros was the golden heir to a prestigious dynasty, and Stephanie was the gardener's daughter who brought him white roses and secret smiles. Their innocent world was incinerated in a single night of betrayal when a rival syndicate orchestrated a bloody coup, leaving Adams' family dead and Adams himself bleeding out in the wreckage. It was Stephanie who risked everything to hide him and stitch his wounds, before they were forced to vanish in opposite directions to survive the bloodbath. While Stephanie disappeared into a life of poverty and aliases, Adams climbed from the gutters to the throne of a criminal empire, hardening his heart into stone and vowing that he would never feel the warmth of a woman's touch again, until the moment he recognized her walk on his casino floor. 10 years ago, the world was a much brighter place, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and the sound of fountain water splashing against marble. Before he was the feared leader of an empire, Adams Toros was just a boy living in a golden cage. His father was a powerful man, and their mansion sat high on a hill, protected by tall iron gates that kept the rest of the world away. To everyone else, Adams was the prince of the city, the boy who would one day inherit everything. But inside the house, he felt like a prisoner of his own name, always being told how to stand, how to speak, and who to trust. The only place he felt truly free was in the far corner of the massive estate, where the formal gardens bled into a wild, hidden thicket. That was where he met Stephanie. She was the daughter of the head gardener, a petite girl with hair like spun silk and eyes that saw right through his royal act. While Adams wore stiff suits and polished shoes, Stephanie often had dirt on her knees and a smudge of green on her cheek. She didn't bow to him or act afraid of his family's shadow. To her, he wasn't a future king, he was just a lonely boy who didn't know how to climb a tree. They spent their afternoons tucked away from the prying eyes of guards and tutors. Stephanie taught him the names of the birds that nested in the oaks, and Adams told her stories about the stars. Their friendship was a secret treasure, a quiet world they built for themselves. One afternoon, while they sat hidden beneath the low-hanging branches of a weeping willow, Stephanie reached into her apron and pulled out a single white rose. It was perfect, its petals soft and untainted by the dusty world outside. "White roses mean a new beginning," she whispered, pressing the flower into his palm. "And they mean I'll always be your friend, no matter what happens." Adams looked down at the rose, his heart feeling fuller than it ever had in the cold halls of his father's mansion. He didn't have much of his own, but he promised himself right then that he would protect Stephanie forever. He thought their lives would always be this way, simple, sweet, and safe. He never imagined that the white rose would one day be crushed in the dirt, or that the golden gates of his home would soon be torn down by fire and hate. For a brief moment, they were just two children in a garden, unaware that the clock was ticking toward a night that would change everything. The dream of the secret garden ended in a nightmare of smoke and steel. It was the night of Adam's 15th birthday, a night that was supposed to be filled with music and laughter. Instead, the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and the terrifying sound of shouting voices. A rival group had planned a surprise attack, a cruel move to steal everything his father owned. In an instant, the mansion that once felt like a golden cage became a death trap. Adams found himself trapped in the library as the fire climbed the tall mahogany bookshelves. The heat was like a physical wall, pushing the breath out of his lungs. He could hear the glass windows shattering and the heavy thud of footsteps in the hallway. He was the prince of the city, but in that moment, he was just a boy who couldn't breathe. He fell to his knees, his eyes stinging from the thick black smoke, certain that he would never see the sun again. Then, the heavy oak doors groaned open. Through the haze, a small figure appeared, her face covered with a wet cloth. It was Stephanie. She didn't have a weapon or a suit of armor, but she had a courage that the attackers could never understand. She grabbed Adam's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't look back, Adams," she shouted over the roar of the flames. "Just follow my voice." She led him through a servant's passage that only the workers knew about, crawling through narrow spaces as the ceiling groaned above them. Just as the main staircase collapsed with a sound like thunder, they tumbled out into the cool night air. Adams lay on the grass, gasping for breath, watching as the only home he had ever known turned into a giant torch against the black sky. His family was gone, his name was a target, and his future was a pile of ash. Stephanie didn't leave him. She pulled him toward the dark woods behind the estate, hiding him in a small tool shed near the edge of the property. She stayed with him through the long, terrifying hours of the night, holding his shaking hands as sirens wailed in the distance. She had saved his life, but they both knew the world had changed forever. The boy who was supposed to be king was now a ghost, and the girl who gave him white roses was now his only hope for survival. As the first light of dawn touched the smoke-filled horizon, Stephanie made a choice that would break both their hearts. She had to make him run, even if it meant she would lose him for a decade. After the fire, Adams was forced to grow up in the cold shadows of the city. He no longer had a mansion or a name that opened doors. Instead, he had only his anger and the memory of the girl who had saved him. To survive, he had to become someone else. He started at the bottom, working for small gangs and doing the jobs no one else wanted. He learned how to be silent, how to be fast, and most importantly, how to never show pain. As the years passed, the boy who loved stars and white roses began to disappear. In his place grew a man made of stone. He climbed the ladder of the criminal world, taking over territories and building a new empire with his own hands. People began to whisper his name in fear. They called him merciless, because he never showed a spark of kindness. He didn't care about money or fancy cars, he only cared about power. He wanted to be so strong that no one could ever set his world on fire again. But beneath his expensive black suits, Adams carried a secret ache that never went away. Even though he had hundreds of people working for him, he was the loneliest man in the city. He didn't want the company of other women. To him, they were all strangers. Every time he walked through his high-stakes casinos or down a busy street, his eyes would scan the crowd. He was looking for a specific shade of blonde hair, a certain petite frame, or a pair of eyes that didn't look at him with fear. He searched through thousands of faces over 10 long years. He looked for her in luxury hotels and in the poorest parts of town. He told himself he was just looking for the girl who saved his life so he could pay her back, but his heart knew the truth. He was looking for his soul. His men thought he was focused on business, but he was really a man haunted by a ghost. Every night, before he went to sleep in his cold, empty mansion, he would close his eyes and try to remember the smell of jasmine. He had become a king of the underworld, but without Stephanie, his throne felt like a pile of ash. He was waiting for a miracle, even though he had stopped believing in them a long time ago. The stone-cold walls of Adam's office were usually a place of silence and hard business. He spent hours staring at the wall of television screens that showed every corner of his massive casino. He watched the high rollers losing thousands and the security teams moving like shadows. He had seen everything 1,000 times, and nothing ever surprised him. To the world, he was a man who felt nothing, a king who ruled a world of neon lights and velvet carpets. But late one Tuesday night, while the rest of the city slept, a single movement on a grainy screen made his heart stop for the first time in 10 years. It was just a cleaning woman. She wore a plain, oversized uniform that hid her shape, and a surgical mask covered most of her face. She was pushing a heavy mop bucket down a long, empty hallway near the private vaults. Most people wouldn't have looked twice at her, but Adams couldn't take his eyes off the screen. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of his mahogany desk so hard his knuckles turned white. It wasn't her face that gave her away, it was the way she moved. Even under the heavy uniform, she walked with a slight, graceful tilt of her head and a quickness in her step that he had memorized as a boy in the secret garden. He watched her pause to adjust a stray lock of blonde hair that had escaped her cap, and his breath caught in his throat. It was the exact same motion she used to make when she was tired from planting white roses. He didn't call security. He didn't move. He just watched her, his eyes burning as he replayed the footage over and over. He saw the way she looked around nervously, her wide eyes full of a fear that she tried to hide behind her work. She was living in his world, right under his nose, wearing a mask to hide from the ghosts of the past. She was no longer the gardener's daughter, and he was no longer the prince, but the connection between them hummed through the digital screen like an electric current. Adams felt a rush of heat break through the ice around his heart. The search was over. He had spent a decade looking for a miracle, and there she was, scrubbing the floors of the empire he had built in her memory. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, but his eyes were full of a strange pain. He knew she was terrified, and he knew she was hiding from people exactly like him. But he was the merciless Adams Toros now, and he wasn't going to let her vanish into the shadows again. He reached for his phone to call the casino manager. The cleaning woman's shift was about to change, and Adams was going to make sure she had nowhere left to run. Adams didn't wait for morning. He spent the rest of the night looking into Stephanie's life through the lens of a computer screen. He discovered that she was living under a fake name, hiding in a tiny, broken-down apartment. Most importantly, he found out why she was working 2 jobs and looking over her shoulder. Her younger sister was very sick, and the hospital bills had piled up into a mountain of debt that Stephanie could never hope to climb. She was trapped, working for the very man she feared just to keep her family alive. The next day, Stephanie was called into the head office. She walked in with her head down, her hands shaking as she held her cleaning cap. She expected to be fired or yelled at for a missed spot on the floor. Instead, she found Adams Toros sitting behind his massive desk, looking like a king on a dark throne. He didn't say hello. He simply pushed a thick stack of papers toward her. "I have bought your debt, Stephanie," he said, his voice as cold as ice. He used her real name for the first time, and she flinched as if he had struck her. "Every dollar you owe the hospital now belongs to me. You don't work for the casino anymore. You work for me, at my home." Stephanie looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "I can't go there. Just let me work here." "It isn't a choice," Adams snapped, though it pained him to see her cry. He had to play the part of the merciless boss to keep his enemies from realizing she was his weakness. "You will live in the servants' quarters of my mansion. You will cook and clean only for me. Consider it a punishment for trying to hide from your past. You will stay until the debt is paid in full." Stephanie signed the papers with a trembling hand, believing she was walking into a prison. She didn't see the way Adam's eyes softened for a split second when she wasn't looking. She didn't know that the mansion was now the most protected fortress in the country, with guards at every gate meant to keep her safe from the rival gangs. To the world, he was treating her like a slave. But as she was led away to his car, Adams watched her go with a fierce look in his eyes. He had brought her back into his golden cage, not to hurt her, but to make sure that this time, the fire would never reach her. He was the only person in the world who knew she was there, and he would let the city burn before he let anyone take her again. The mansion was silent, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch across the marble floors like dark fingers. Stephanie stood in the center of the grand library, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She looked tiny beneath the high ceilings. Adams sat in a large leather chair, the glow from the fireplace dancing in his dark eyes. For the first time in 10 years, there were no guards, no cameras, and no masks between them. The silence was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. "Why did you run, Stephanie?" Adams asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. "I waited in that shed. I waited for days. I thought you were coming back for me." Stephanie looked up, and he saw the tears she had been trying to hide. "I wanted to come back, Adams. But my father found me that morning. He saw the blood on my clothes and the fire in the distance. He knew your family's enemies would come for anyone who helped you. He told me that if I stayed near you, we would both be dead by sunset." She took a shaky step toward him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The men who attacked your home, they came to our house next. They didn't just want your father's money, they wanted to erase everyone who ever loved the Toros. My father took us and fled the city that same day. He made me change my name. He made me promise to forget you so that I could stay alive." Adams felt a sharp pain in his chest. For a decade, he had believed she might have abandoned him because he was the son of a marked man. He never realized she had been running to save her own life from the fire he had brought upon her. "I never forgot," she cried, her shoulders shaking. "Every time I saw your face on the news, or heard people whisper about the merciless Adams Toros, I wanted to run to you. But I saw what you had become. You were so cold, so powerful. I thought if I came back, I would just be another person for you to crush." Adams stood up slowly. The merciless king felt his crown of ice finally begin to melt. He didn't reach for her yet, he knew his touch might still feel like a threat. Instead, he simply stood in the firelight, watching the girl from the garden weep for the years they had lost. "I became this way so I could find you," he said softly. "I built this fortress so no one could ever make you run again." The silence of the decade was finally broken, but as the truth settled between them, they both knew that the danger wasn't over. The past was out in the open, and in Adam's world, the truth was often the most dangerous thing of all. While Adams and Stephanie were finding their way back to each other inside the mansion, a different kind of darkness was gathering outside the gates. Victor Thorne, the man who had led the attack 10 years ago, sat in a high-rise office across the city. He was a man who moved like a snake in the grass, always looking for a crack in his enemy's armor. For years, he had been frustrated by Adams Toros. He couldn't find a single weakness in the merciless king. Adams didn't care for jewels, he didn't have friends, and he never stayed in one place for long. He was like a ghost that ruled a kingdom of stone. But lately, Thorne's spies had noticed a change. The fortress-like mansion was suddenly bustling with extra guards. Adams was spending less time at the casinos and more time behind his own iron gates. And then, there was the report about a cleaning woman, a girl who had been moved from the casino floor directly into Adams' private home. Thorne leaned back in his chair, a cruel grin spreading across his face. He watched a grainy photo of Stephanie being led into Adam's car. So, Thorn hissed to his men. The statue finally has a heartbeat. He thinks he can hide his little treasure from me. Thorn knew that Adams would never surrender for money or power. But a woman? A girl from the past? That was a weapon he could use. He realized that Adams wasn't just guarding a servant, he was guarding his own soul. If Thorn could steal that soul, he could break the merciless king into 1,000 pieces. He didn't waste any time. He knew that the best way to hurt a man like Adams was to take away the only thing that made him feel human. Thorn called his most dangerous team together. "Watch the gates," he ordered. "Wait for the one moment he isn't by her side. I want her brought to me. I want to see the look on Adam's face when he realizes that his fortress wasn't strong enough to keep me out." The peace inside the mansion was about to shatter. While Adams was planning a future where they could be safe, Thorn was sharpening his knife. The shadow of the past was no longer just a memory, it was a living enemy, moving closer with every tick of the clock. The hunt had begun, and this time, the prize wasn't an empire, it was Stephanie. The storm that had been brewing finally broke on a cold, rainy Tuesday. Adams had only stepped away for an hour to deal with a security emergency at the docks, but that was all the time Victor Thorn needed. When Adams returned to the mansion, the front gates were wide open, and the guards were unconscious on the ground. The house was silent, but on the library table sat a burner phone, vibrating with a mocking persistence. Adams answered it, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "If you touch her, Thorn, there won't be enough of you left to bury." Thorn's laughter came through the speaker, sharp and cold. "Relax, Adams. She's safe for now. But she is very expensive. I don't want your money, and I don't want your apologies. I want your throne. By midnight, I want you to sign over every casino, every warehouse, and every street you own to me. If the papers aren't signed, the girl dies. An empire for a life, Adams. Is the merciless king ready to become a beggar for a gardener's daughter?" Adams didn't even blink. He didn't call his lawyers, and he didn't try to bargain. The empire he had built over 10 years, the power he had fought and bled for, suddenly felt like a handful of dust. He realized that he had only built his kingdom to find her, and now that he had, the kingdom meant nothing if she wasn't in it. "Tell me where to meet," Adams said, his voice steady and sure. "The papers are already being drafted. You can have the city. Just give her back." Thorn was silenced for a moment, shocked by how quickly the most powerful man in the city had folded. He had expected a war, he hadn't expected a sacrifice. He gave Adams the address of an old, abandoned shipyard. Adams moved with a calm, deadly purpose. He signed the documents that stripped him of his wealth and his title. He walked out of his mansion with nothing but the clothes on his back and a hidden knife in his boot. He drove toward the shipyard, watching the neon lights of his city fade in the rearview mirror. For 10 years, he thought power was the only thing that could protect him. But as he saw the distant lights of the shipyard, he knew the truth. He wasn't losing everything, he was finally getting rid of the weight that had kept him from her. The King of Stone was dead, and for the first time in a decade, Adams Toros felt like a man who could finally breathe. The shipyard was cold and smelled of salt and old rust, but Adams didn't feel the chill. He walked into the center of the largest warehouse, where Victor Thorn stood waiting. Stephanie was there, tied to a wooden chair, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Adams, a small sound of hope escaped her lips. Thorn held up the papers Adams had signed, a greedy smile stretching across his face. "You really did it," Thorn whispered, looking at the documents. The great Adams Toros is now just a man with nothing. You gave away the city for a girl. I gave away a cage for my life, Adams replied, his voice calm and steady. He walked toward Stephanie, ignoring the guards who pointed their weapons at him. Thorne was so busy celebrating his new wealth that he didn't realize Adams wasn't afraid. Adams reached down and sliced through Stephanie's ropes with the small knife he had hidden. He pulled her up and held her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. Thorne laughed, waving the papers in the air. Get out of here before I change my mind. Go be a nobody in a world that used to fear you. Adams didn't look back at the empire he was leaving behind. He led Stephanie out of the warehouse and into the light of a new dawn. He was no longer a crime lord, and he was no longer merciless. He was just Adams. A few months later, the city was a distant memory. Adams and Stephanie lived in a small house near the coast, far away from neon lights and iron gates. There were no guards, no hidden cameras, and no secrets. In the backyard, a small garden was starting to grow. It wasn't as grand as the mansions, but it was theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ocean, Adams walked into the kitchen and handed Stephanie a single white rose he had grown himself. He looked at her and saw the same girl who had saved him 10 years ago, but now, the fear was gone from her eyes. He had lost his money, his power, and his throne, but as he held her hand, he realized he had never been richer. The silence of the stone years was gone, replaced by the quiet peace of a life built on love. The boy who would be king had finally found something better, he had found his way home.